My name is Cindy, a 35-year-old office worker. I met my husband Joe through a colleague at work, sort of a blind date, and we ended up getting married. Joe and I are the same age and share similar hobbies, so I anticipated a joyful life together. Joe's parents were cheerful and kind. My mother-in-law once said, "We were worried because Joe hadn't brought home a single potential bride until now. Please take good care of Joe." Her words stung a bit, considering I'm his age too, but I chose to ignore it. A year has passed since our wedding. Though we sometimes argued, and Joe would often bring up divorce during those moments, I thought it was just part of married life. Despite this, we generally got along well. On weekends, we enjoyed driving and taking day trips, a hobby we had shared even before getting married. While I used to travel alone frequently, we now did everything as a couple. Joe lived with his parents until we got married, using their car when he went out. Since then, we've been using my car, which is nearing its end. I originally drove a compact car because I liked the design and rarely had passengers, but I was now considering buying a new one before the next inspection. When I discussed this with Joe, he agreed, saying, "It's your car, so do as you like. But if you're going to replace it, why not get a larger car instead of a compact?" I agreed with his suggestion. The following weekend, we went to look at cars together. As we began looking at cars, Joe grew increasingly excited. He pointed out an expensive model, praising its performance, spacious interior, and overall quality. Despite its appeal, I hesitated due to the high costs, which I hadn't planned for. Joe suggested, "How about I take out a loan in my name? We both drive about the same amount, and the payments would come from our household budget." Although it didn't matter who took the loan, his suggestion seemed practical, and we decided to explore that option. We looked at other cars, but we liked the first one best and decided on it. However, the loan application in Joe's name was denied, likely because he had just changed jobs. Joe became angry and snapped at the clerk, "I'm saying I'll buy it. Can't you do something about it?" This is one of the things I dislike about Joe. He often has a condescending attitude towards staff, no matter the store. When I tried to calm him down, he got upset and went outside to smoke. Joe can be domineering and quick to threaten divorce when things don't go his way, which is exhausting. I apologized profusely to the salesperson. Maybe it would be easier to get a loan for a smaller amount. If the car is cheaper, I could pay in full, I suggested while consulting with the salesperson. Just then, Joe returned. "Hey, why not buy it under Cindy's name? I'll be the one paying anyway," he said, leaving me to ponder the situation. Actually, I found Joe's suggestion appealing. None of the other cars resonated with me the same way. I nodded and signed the documents. They said it would take a few months for the car to be delivered. In the meantime, I drove around in my old car, cherishing our last moments together. One day, as my husband sat in the passenger seat, fiddling with his smartphone, he remarked, "Finally bidding farewell to this cramped space, huh?" During the drive, I let him take the wheel and casually glanced at his phone left on the dashboard. A message caught my eye. "Did you get a new car? And it's a luxury car at that." It was from one of Joe's colleagues. Joe seemed to be showing off our new car. Given his vanity, he likely hadn't mentioned that the car was purchased under my name. Though I thought it mattered, this car ultimately changed our fate. 3 months later, the first place we went in our newly delivered car was to my in-laws' house. We visited to celebrate my father-in-law's retirement, a visit my husband always emphasized as important to honor his parents. When my father-in-law greeted us, he excitedly examined the car and exclaimed, "So this is the new car. It's so cool." I suggested, "Let's go out together in it next time," to which he responded with delight. My mother-in-law also chimed in, "I want to go too. How about a spa trip?" She seemed excited, so I started making plans, taking their wishes into account. At my in-laws, we had a wonderful time reminiscing about my father-in-law's work and my husband's childhood. One memorable comment from my mother-in-law was, "I really wanted a daughter. I thought it would be fun to go out and share clothes with her, but instead, I gave birth to Big Joe." She then added, "So Cindy, if you don't mind, let's go out together next time." I was thrilled. However, my husband didn't seem to find this amusing. Although my mother-in-law was only joking and hadn't implied he was unwanted, he sulked. Before we got married, I found his pouting cute, but it has become a bit annoying with how frequently it happens. Perhaps because his parents were present, my husband refrained from saying anything, but he often used the threat of divorce to manipulate me into compliance. Despite the tension, we managed to navigate the situation and returned home. The following day, after returning from work, my husband entered the living room and announced, "The luxury car you bought will be a gift for my dad. If you disagree, we might as well divorce, right?" Initially, I thought he was joking and tried to brush it off, but it became evident he was dead serious. "Wait, why are you bringing this up now?" I asked, puzzled. Dad was eyeing that car with envy. The best way to honor my parents' retirement is by gifting him that car and letting him enjoy it, he insisted firmly. I was taken aback by his sudden demand, but Joe remained adamant and refused to compromise. He's always been stubborn, and there are moments when he becomes irate if I don't go along with his wishes. Annoyed, I attempted to reason with him, saying, "We agreed to spend time with your father together, didn't we? Giving the car as a gift is..." But he wasn't open to discussion. The argument escalated, and Joe began to lose his temper. As their only son, I feel it's my duty to give something back to Mom and Dad. I want them to appreciate having a son, not a daughter. Joe seemed still affected by his mother's comment about wishing for a daughter. Perhaps he felt competitive after his mother expressed interest in going out with me. I was stunned. We couldn't possibly afford to give such an expensive gift. Why don't we plan a trip to a hot spring resort instead? We talked about this yesterday, didn't we? But Joe remained dissatisfied, glaring at me. "I married you, a woman past her prime, didn't I? You have nothing to boast about. Do you even realize who is responsible for the life we're leading? Just once, listen to what I have to say." His harsh words chilled my feelings for Joe instantly. Past her prime, huh? I was aware of it, but hearing someone else say it was infuriating. After all, I managed the household chores, which put me in a better position than Joe, who couldn't do much around the house. Besides, I was also contributing financially, and our livelihood didn't depend solely on Joe's salary. With these thoughts, the aspects of Joe that grated on me began to surface. His treatment of waitstaff, his tendency to sulk, his stubbornness. I had tried to overlook these traits, but now they were starting to wear on me. As these thoughts churned in my mind, Joe left the room and returned with something in his hand. "Ha!" I exclaimed when he handed me divorce papers. As I looked up in surprise, he said, "Just sign the car ownership transfer document. If you're not okay with it, you can fill out the divorce papers and leave. It's up to you." To my disbelief, the divorce papers were already filled out. "That's enough," I muttered, feeling fed up. "Fine." As I signed the document, Joe nodded with satisfaction, casually discarding the divorce papers and retreating to his room. The next day, Joe handed me the necessary documents for the car's title transfer, asking, "Can we transfer the title even though we just took out a loan?" I took the documents, pondering his question. To be certain, I decided to consult the dealership where we purchased the car. It turned out that transferring the title while a loan was still active posed significant challenges. Additionally, since the ownership change required my father-in-law's approval, it couldn't be the surprise gift Joe envisioned. Besides, my father-in-law had never expressed a desire for a car. I thought if I explained this to Joe, he might abandon the idea. I also explored the option of selling the car. Now that it felt tainted by our recent conflict, I wasn't sure if I wanted to keep driving it. The model was popular and production couldn't keep up with demand, so selling it could fetch a high price. With that money, I could pay off the loan and choose a new car that I truly liked. When I arrived home from work and explained to Joe the complications of changing the car's title due to the loan, he responded sharply, "Then we'll just have to buy another car. Dad will be thrilled for sure." "I'm sorry, but Dad never expressed a desire for a car," I countered. "Well, then it looks like we're really going to get divorced," Joe muttered before storming off to his room. I reached my breaking point. I had been willing to work through things if he apologized, but I couldn't continue the marriage under these circumstances. I made the decision to pack my belongings. Simultaneously, I arranged to sell the car. The dealership offering the highest price agreed to collect it at a later date. A sense of relief washed over me. I planned to move out while Joe was at work the following week, putting an end to everything. With this resolve in mind, I finished my shift on Friday and returned home, only to find the car missing from its usual spot in the parking lot. "What?" I hurried inside to check if the car keys were still where I left them. "They're gone." Panic set in as I dialed Joe's number repeatedly. Despite my efforts, he didn't answer, nor did he read my messages asking him to contact me. Did Joe take the car somewhere? But that car is already 3 hours later. I finally received a message from him. He explained he was on a trip with a colleague and suggested we both needed time to cool down. What? I exclaimed involuntarily, my voice rising as I stared at my phone screen in frustration. If Joe was on a trip, it meant he wouldn't be back tonight. I wasted no time and swiftly set my plans into motion, plans I had carefully laid out over the past few days. I called a real estate agent I knew from work and finalized the lease on the apartment he had reserved for me. I also arranged for a moving company to relocate all my belongings, furniture, appliances, everything. By the next morning, the movers had efficiently packed and transported everything to my new place. By mid-afternoon, I had settled into my new life. With the weight lifted off my shoulders, I found myself dozing off. Suddenly, my phone rang, startling me awake. It was Joe calling. He must have returned home, discovered my absence, and was likely taken aback enough to call. I couldn't help but smirk a little as I answered the phone. "Cindy, can you help me?" Joe's voice came through the phone, frantic and alarmed. It was clear he wasn't at home. "I had an accident, and my insurance isn't covering it." Confused, I replied, "What?" Joe's frustration grew evident. "That's why the new car's insurance. I called them after the accident, but they're saying it's not covered." As I pieced together his words, realization dawned. "What do you mean you had an accident? Where are you? Are you hurt?" I asked, attempting to sound concerned despite my mixed emotions. It wasn't my fault. The other party wasn't paying attention. But more importantly, what about the insurance? Joe sighed heavily. "I thought I made myself clear, didn't I? I told you not to use the car for now, Joe. You said you understood, right? So why did you take it out without asking? We agreed to let each other know when using the car separately. Does none of that matter now?" Cindy took over, calling the insurance company from my end. Hearing the word accident made me nervous, but if he had the energy to shout, it probably wasn't too serious. I calmly laid out the situation. The car was reported stolen. When I got home, it was gone, so I reported it to the police. In fact, it was scheduled to be sold today, and now you're telling me there's been an accident. What am I supposed to do? I canceled the insurance because the sale was finalized. I canceled it when I told you not to touch the car. Upon hearing this, my husband, or rather, my soon-to-be ex-husband, began to panic. "Whoa, wait a minute. Even if I was driving our car, it shouldn't be reported stolen, Cindy. Please withdraw the theft report first. I understand about the insurance. We can discuss the financials when I get back home." But I couldn't simply accept his words. "By the way, I almost forgot to mention, you and I are now strangers. I filed for divorce 3 days ago, and it's been approved. Also, I'm not living in that house anymore." He shouted these words over the phone, but I hung up anyway. After hanging up, his calls continued relentlessly, so I eventually turned off my phone to get some peace. The next day, I took a day off from work to organize my room. When I switched my phone back on in the morning, it was flooded with missed calls from my ex-husband. There was even a call around 1 a.m., likely when he returned home. But he was the one who hastily filed for divorce, and he was the one who used divorce as a threat. If he believed that mentioning divorce would make me comply with his demands, he was mistaken. Initially, when we first married, I might have given in to avoid the embarrassment of divorce so soon after tying the knot at 35. Perhaps that's why he assumed I would comply again. However, as I sorted through my room and reflected on everything, all those pent-up frustrations finally pushed me past my hesitations. My phone rang again. Assuming it was my ex-husband, I checked, only to see it was a call from my mother-in-law. "I received a call from Joe yesterday. He mentioned something about an accident and you leaving, but I couldn't make sense of it." "What's going on?" she asked, concerned. I took a deep breath and explained everything to her. "I apologize to you and father-in-law, but the divorce is final. Regarding the money for the car and dividing our belongings, I'm planning to arrange a meeting to discuss it soon." Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law apologized profusely and said, "If it's all right with you, could I attend that meeting?" I'm worried Joe might say something unreasonable. I agreed to hold the post-divorce meeting at my in-laws' house. When I visited my in-laws after a long while, I found my father-in-law scolding my ex-husband. My mother-in-law noticed my arrival and invited me into the living room. As expected, my ex-husband was sulking, but a stern word from his father made him reluctantly lower his head. She mentioned that because you only do what you want, her life is in shambles. My father-in-law chastised him. That's when I revealed that I had sought legal advice regarding his constant threats of divorce, which could be deemed emotional abuse. My ex-husband's face drained of color upon hearing this. After some negotiation, we reached an agreement. He would cover the initial costs of the new car and the expenses related to retracting the theft report, with my father-in-law making up the difference. As I was leaving, my mother-in-law expressed regret, saying, "It's a shame we couldn't spend more time together, Cindy." I replied, "If it's all right with you, let's do it again sometime," and took my leave. It turned out that the colleagues my husband had shown off the car to on that fateful day were also present during the accident. They learned everything. The car was registered in my name, we were divorced, and the car had been reported stolen. Gossip spread through his workplace, and he became the subject of ridicule behind his back. Around this time, there was talk of a transfer, which he eagerly accepted due to discomfort in his current role. However, it turned out to be more of a demotion, sending him to a rural area. Expecting convenience stores and laundromats for daily needs, he found nothing nearby. The nearest supermarket was a 30-minute drive away, and there were no laundromats in sight. Recently, Catherine, who had invited me for a meal, expressed hesitancy about asking him how he was managing household chores. She was pleasantly surprised when I agreed to meet her, and now we've developed a close friendship. I'm content now. I've purchased a new car within my budget and enjoy solo trips, just like I did before. Guess what, Rosalie? My family's coming over, and you're in charge of hosting them at this fancy restaurant. Can you handle that? Oh, and by the way, do you know how to manage money? You didn't save anything, did you? Rosalie was puzzled. What do you mean? What's mine is yours. So, this restaurant you own. It's mine too. Everything's free. That sounded crazy to Rosalie. Her husband Kyle seemed clueless, thinking he could just invite the family over and not pay. Something wasn't right. Plus, he didn't seem to get it. He was about to land himself in trouble. Kyle, we can't give everything away for free. But don't worry about the money. I know you don't have savings, and I knew you were inviting the family today. So, I already arranged for someone else to pay in advance. Stop lying. I never mentioned inviting the family, and none of them said anything about being billed. My husband insisted, gesturing toward our relatives. His parents, his brother, his wife, and a few others were chatting with a waitress nearby. He smirked and made fun of them while I struggled not to burst out laughing, my lips twitching. I have been getting ready for this day. I'll do my best to entertain them just like you want, I replied, smiling to myself as I listened to him. Our in-laws approached. Hi, Rosalie. We're here to visit today. What a lovely place this is. Everyone seems to be having a great time, they said warmly, their demeanor a sharp contrast to my husband's. Mom, Dad, thanks for coming. Rosalie's happy you're here. Today's on me, my husband said casually, even though he planned to eat for free. He lied effortlessly, not just to his parents but probably to his brother and other relatives too. He's lied before, but he's so confident he won't get caught because everyone sees him as the perfect son. Rosalie's really been excelling. She took over the restaurant from her late parents and has been running it impressively. It wasn't easy at first, but she turned things around. She's my pride and joy, he boasted to his parents, deliberately praising me, his pride and joy, to deceive them. But in reality, he barely sees me as more than a maid. As he spoke, my in-laws turned to me, nodding in approval. They've always recognized my efforts since the beginning of our marriage. Their kindness shone through their eyes. Meanwhile, my husband subtly changed his expression, silently warning me to keep quiet. Rosalie's been working hard, and Kyle's doing well too. Everything's going smoothly at Brown Trading, right? Your salary's been increasing, hasn't it? They asked. Yeah, that's correct. I'm respected at Brown Trading, and my boss has high hopes for me. I aim to lead my team through actions and results, and I'll keep up the good work, my husband replied confidently. That's our son, all right. Spending $155,000 like that isn't something just anyone can do, his parents remarked proudly, but my husband's expression darkened slightly at that moment. Today, we have 15 relatives dining with us, including my in-laws and brother-in-law's family. It's $11,000 per person, totaling $115,000. I calculated silently, knowing my husband was trying to get it all for free, unaware of the cost. When he realized it was pricier than he thought, he quickly regained composure to avoid exposing his lie. This one's on me, everyone. It's the least I can do. I just got my bonus, so no worries at all. Leave it to me, he declared, puffing up his chest as the in-laws chuckled softly. Checking the time, it was 6:00 p.m., so I guided my husband and in-laws to their reserved seats. The other relatives followed suit. Just as they were settling in, my husband shot me a creepy grin. An hour later, I approached their table in the banquet room. They were enjoying themselves, oblivious to the surroundings. Feel free to order more, everyone. It boosts restaurant sales, and Rosalie will be delighted, so go ahead, my husband encouraged, each word accompanied by a flurry of extra orders. With the banquet meals and additional orders, the bill had surpassed $20,000. Everyone assumed my husband, a corporate elite with a hefty income, was treating them. While some hesitated, my husband seemed to push them to order more. That's when I decided to set the record straight, loud enough for all to hear. Since it's Kyle's treat, I had $60,000 transferred yesterday, so everyone, please enjoy yourselves without holding back, I announced, causing a buzz of surprise among the relatives. $60,000. Classic Kyle, were words of almost admiration that flew around. While the relatives reacted like this, my husband wore a bewildered look, clueless about what was going on. I didn't miss his expression and added a line to start my counterattack. Well, the $60,000 isn't for the food. It's for alimony, actually, I stated, causing puzzled looks among the buzzing relatives. Alimony, Kyle? What's this about alimony? One of them asked. No, I don't know about any alimony. Sometimes Rosalie jokes around, so please don't mind her. Come on, Rosalie, don't upset everyone with jokes like that. My husband tried to brush it off, but he was clearly the most troubled. His face was smiling, but his eyes told a different story. The way he looked at me was terrifying. But it wasn't done. Kyle, you're the one making uncomfortable jokes here. I think it's time the family knew that, right? I said firmly, handing him a piece of paper and a bank book. As he examined them closely, his face turned pale. The alimony is for cheating. Kyle has been unfaithful. He's not the person you all think he is. He can lie and deceive people without a second thought, I revealed. The atmosphere in the banquet room shifted abruptly. The once lively chatter ceased, replaced by an eerie silence. The document I handed to my husband was the original alimony claim, and the bank book showed a record of a $60,000 transfer. Everyone's attention was fixed on my husband and me, and silence lingered for a few seconds. But it was my husband who broke it. How funny, Rosalie. That's quite something. It looks just like a real statement in a bank book. But really, this is going too far. There's no way I would cheat. It seemed like he had shifted back to his usual confident demeanor, but that confidence quickly faded, and I couldn't help but smile. What are you talking about, Kyle? You're the one who's gone too far. Not only cheating, but also trying to bully me into eating for free, lying to all the relatives that it's your treat. That's too much of a joke. Correct yourself quickly, everyone. Don't take Rosalie's words to heart. Without needing to say anything, the relatives seemed unable to believe it outright, and no one spoke up. I didn't react to my husband's words either, just watching his actions closely. Gradually, he started to panic. That's when he tried to get his parents on his side. Dad, Mom, tell her to stop these senseless jokes at a time like this. Yes, everyone calm down and listen to me, his dad began. Rosalie isn't making any senseless jokes. She's just stating the facts. It's undeniable that Kyle has been unfaithful, and she's not threatening Rosie. He's trying to get today's meal for free too. What are you two even saying? Are you taking what Rosie said seriously? That's not funny at all, my husband protested, but his parents seemed convinced. The only thing that's not funny is this situation. We've come here knowing everything to confront you, I declared. Yes, I had already confessed everything to my in-laws, revealing how my husband uses his outward kindness to play the dutiful son while behind the scenes, he's up to no good. Even as we waited for our reservation time, he tried to deceive his parents, but they saw through his lies. Enough. I would never deceive everyone. You're ruining the good mood we had, Rosalie. What are you going to do about this? My disclosure and having the in-laws on my side were completely unexpected for him. He visibly started to lose his composure, standing up and glaring at me intensely, as if he might lunge at me any moment. Come on, brother, calm down. Let's sit down and talk this over calmly. Nicholas, you believe me, right? Interjected his brother, my brother-in-law Nicholas, cutting through my husband's angry shouts. Nicholas, busy with his own job, was attending today with his wife Yasmin. I knew Nicholas and my husband had been close since before I started dating him. and he is as gentle and consistently smiling as the in-laws. However, Nicholas's next action would utterly defeat my husband. He pulled a thick envelope out of his bag and handed it to my husband, saying, "You believe me, right, brother?" "How can I believe you when you've been cheating with my wife, Nicholas?" "You what?" My husband's accusation hung heavy in the air as Nicholas handed over the envelope. Inside was a report on the infidelity investigation. It turns out my husband had been cheating with Nicholas's wife, Yasmin. Just before my father-in-law had said, "We've come here knowing everything," and by we, he meant the brother-in-law's family too. And it turns out, I learned about my husband's infidelity thanks to Nicholas. Hesitantly, my husband checked the contents of the envelope, turning pale as a ghost. Inside were numerous photos of him cheating with Yasmin, pictures of them dining at a fancy restaurant, looking into each other's eyes. There were photos of them being cozy in a car and others of them embracing and kissing in front of a hotel. There's no way he could just say they were just going out. It was indeed a decisive moment, a hellish scene. "Is this a joke? Unbelievable, Kyle did this," were the whispers I heard. The relatives around us were in turmoil, and the banquet hall buzzed in a whole different way. For my husband, it couldn't have gotten any worse. He was completely flustered now. No, wait. This investigation report is fake. The photos must be doctored because I haven't cheated with Yasmin. "We didn't cheat, right?" he pleaded, trying to enlist Yasmin's support in his last-ditch effort. Immediately after Yasmin, now the center of attention, bowed deeply to the floor in full prostration. "Everyone, I am terribly sorry. I have had an affair with Kyle." Yasmin's confession stunned the room. My husband in particular was visibly shaken. He hadn't anticipated Yasmin fully admitting to the affair. He had been insisting the alimony bill and the bank book were fake, only thinking of himself and taking me for granted. He couldn't have imagined this. Yasmin's earnest apology captivated not only my husband but also the rest of the banquet hall. But it wasn't just my husband who was affected. All the relatives were stunned by Yasmin's admission. As her forehead remained on the floor, she slowly began to speak. It really was just a fling. Nicholas is a wonderful husband, but, well, it lacked excitement, you might say. Just doing housework and waiting at home for Nicholas to return, I started to feel like my life would forever be the same. And suddenly, I got bored. When I approached Kyle, he was happy to go along. Everyone listened in silence to Yasmin's voice, mixed with regret and reflection. As she raised her head and revealed more truths, I tried to end it immediately, knowing it was wrong. But Kyle got serious about it. He threatened to expose everything if I tried to break it off. I know it sounds like an excuse now, but I am truly sorry. Yasmin's confession left the relatives staring in disbelief at such a lack of morals. Yasmin had initiated the affair, and though she was threatened, it's hard to completely sympathize with her. But she came here today to admit her mistakes and apologize, which is somewhat redeemable. However, my husband tried to escape by lying and making excuses, unaware that he was just tightening the noose around his own neck. He really is a fool, brother. It's all useless. I, Rosalie, and our parents know everything. I'm going to demand alimony from you, and you're going to pay Nicholas. When did you realize? You didn't even do an investigation. You must have been sure, right? Yes, I heard it from someone I truly despise, you brother. Right, Rosalie? That's right. It wasn't just Yasmin. He had his hands on other women too. What, Rosalie? How much do you know? Just give me a break already. Too bad, Kyle. I know everything, and if anyone should be asking for mercy, it's us. I never thought you'd even make a move on an employee at a restaurant. I continued, then called the woman into the banquet hall. This woman was the waitress who had been talking with the in-laws, Nicholas, Yasmin, and several other relatives while they waited for their reservation time. Turns out, while having an affair with Yasmin, my husband had also been making advances towards this waitress. She had also attended the same school with me back in our student days. Before even consulting Rosalie, who was the restaurant owner, she came to me. Kyle had threatened to destroy your family if you spilled the beans to Rosalie. You're really horrible. I've said it before, but we know everything, brother. All you can do now is admit your guilt and apologize, just like Yasmin did. Kyle, let me ask you something. Why would you deceive Rosalie to carry on with your affairs? From what we can see, Rosalie has been nothing but supportive. She's been managing the restaurant that she inherited from her parents and taking care of home as well. What did she ever do to you? Under the cold stares, my husband flinched at his father-in-law's question. I thought there was no valid excuse for infidelity, but if I had been unconsciously pushing him into a corner, I wanted to reflect on myself too. Awaiting his response, what he said next was shocking. I married Rosalie because I felt sorry for her. Before our marriage, she was struggling to turn the restaurant around with both parents gone. I was the only one she could rely on. I couldn't live without that feeling of superiority. And then what? Rosalie managed to turn it around. The restaurant became popular, and suddenly I found it boring. That's why I thought of dumping her, my husband said, smirking as if he had nothing to lose. Despite already knowing his true nature, a deep disgust welled up from within. It seemed he viewed everyone but himself as mere tools. The cold stares from the relatives quickly turned to pity. A feeling of superiority felt good, got bored, and decided to dump her. Kyle, do you realize what you're saying? You're successful in your big company because Rosalie supported you. Don't you have any gratitude? No, you're wrong. I succeeded because of my own skills. Besides, isn't it normal for a wife to support her husband? Does a mother serve a father expecting gratitude? No, right? Rosalie served me because she loved me. It's presumptuous to expect gratitude for that, my husband argued. Enough, Kyle. I find you repulsive. We are cutting ties with you, but we will watch you until you take responsibility. Be prepared. Fine, cut ties or whatever. I have a stable job. I can live on my own. In fact, it's a relief, right, Rosalie? You can enjoy life more without me around. I'll pay whatever alimony or anything else, so don't worry. My husband laughed, seemingly without a care. Looking at him, I thought again, he doesn't understand anything, knows nothing at all. Really? You can pay alimony? Aren't you about to be sued by your company, Kyle? A lawsuit for damages isn't cheap, you know, I retorted. What? The company's suing me? That's ridiculous. You were bragging today, weren't you, that you're respected at Brown Trading, that your boss has high expectations, that you lead your subordinates with actions and results. But it was all lies. In reality, you've been threatening your subordinates and embezzling company money. What? I would never do something like that. I rose through the ranks on my own merit. Don't talk nonsense when you know nothing, my husband protested. What you don't know, Kyle, is that all the subordinates you threatened have come forward. The company has been aware of the issue for a while. But you don't have to believe me, I'm just stating facts. It'll be interesting to see how far you fall. I explained to him in a calm tone, trying to make him understand. And the color drained from his face. If he really had no idea, he could have laughed it off. But the truth is, he was misbehaving at work too, so denying it was impossible. Seeing the realization dawn on him, he quickly turned, pleading, Rosalie, you're right. I knew nothing. I'd only said those things because I wanted to leave. Please continue to support me if we divorce now. I stopped him right there. Don't say anything more. The relatives are about to tear you apart, Kyle. It's too late for anything now, and it doesn't matter whether you knew or didn't know. No one will help you, and you'll get your wish to live alone. Oh, and by the way, make sure you pay for today's bill. It was your treat, wasn't it? The moment I said this, Kyle collapsed to his knees. No one reached out to help him. Today, after threatening me, deceiving the relatives to get a free meal, he finds himself unable to get off scot-free. Afterwards, I filed for divorce, and Kyle was sued by his company. Kyle ended up incurring a significant amount of debt. The reason Kyle had no savings despite dealing with Brown Trading was that he was footing the bill for entertainment expenses with the employees. However, this entertainment was merely a pretext. In reality, Kyle was just squandering money at nightclubs. Given that Kyle, who had a high-paying job, had no savings, it's clear he had been recklessly spending his money. This was entirely Kyle's own doing, so he should have dealt with it himself. But instead, he asked for help from his in-laws and Nicholas's family. Of course, no one was willing to help. Kyle had defiantly claimed he could live on his own and even laughed off being disowned. So it's no surprise, yet Kyle continued his futile attempts and kept sending messages to my smartphone incessantly. I was wrong. I shouldn't have cheated. I regret it. Please help me. The messages clearly showed he was desperate, but it felt like just another act. Given his history of deceit and manipulation, it's hard to believe him still. I have not blocked Kyle's contact. I've left it unblocked so that I can receive his messages. I want to see what becomes of a person who has only thought of himself and demeaned others around him. It's uncertain what will happen to Kyle now that he has hit rock bottom. One thing I do know is that unless Kyle truly repents and changes himself, he will not be able to climb out of this pit. That much I am sure of. Rosalie, I am truly sorry for what my brother has done. It's irreparable. Nicholas apologized to me after divorcing Yasmin. The in-laws who came with him also deeply bowed their heads. I am a failure as a parent. I can't believe I didn't see my son's true nature sooner. If only I had realized earlier, this wouldn't have happened. Kyle took advantage of your kindness, Rosalie, and did whatever he wanted. It was our responsibility to stop him. You all don't need to apologize. If anything, I am grateful. I had no one else to rely on, no parents or relatives. So thank you for always being on my side. From the beginning of our marriage, the in-laws and Nicholas had been my allies. That I was able to turn around the inherited restaurant was possible only with their support. They are genuinely kind and always smiling. They showed such fury on my behalf that was incredibly comforting to me, who is utterly alone. I will never forget this warmth for as long as I live. Why aren't you eating dinner? My father-in-law asked, seeing us for the first time in a long time for New Year's. He must have noticed that there was only enough food at the dining room table for 3. It happens all the time. What? My father-in-law looked curiously across the table at my mother-in-law and husband. What exactly do you mean by it happens all the time? A daughter-in-law who can't give her mother-in-law grandchildren would have to be a slave, wouldn't she? My mother-in-law responded casually while chewing on the hamburger steak I had made. That's right. Ruby is our slave. She stays in the kitchen to take care of us while we eat, my husband chimed in, echoing his mother's sentiment. As expected, he continued, he took me to his mother's every weekend to help her with housework, even though you couldn't give her grandchildren. I'm letting you stay here. You should appreciate her and do the best you can for my mom. I didn't want to go to my in-laws' house, but I had made a commitment. Even if I refused to go, my husband would verbally force me. He knows I have a short temper and difficulty finding my words. Mom, I brought a slave. He even greeted me that way recently. What are you talking about? My father-in-law seemed offended by the way my mother-in-law and husband referred to me as a slave. That's not how a normal family with children behaves. Ruby, it's not your fault. You should stop bullying her. What do you mean? You're the one that lives so far away, so stay out of the problem, my husband snapped back. That's right, Dad. Don't tell me what to do. You didn't have to watch Mom lose the possibility of having grandchildren, my mother-in-law added, with a tone that sounded like they were mocking my father-in-law. I tossed the coffee beans in the grinder while listening to their conversation. My mother-in-law and husband always ordered me to bring them coffee as soon as they finished eating. I was so busy with shopping for my mother-in-law that I only had time to eat a piece of sweetbread earlier. Come on, I'm hungry too. I'm not sure what I'm doing, I muttered to myself as if escaping from the grinder's blade. A single coffee bean fell to the floor. My name is Ruby and I'm a 37-year-old housewife. During the weekday lunch hours, I work part-time in the kitchen of a family restaurant. My husband and I rent an apartment. I used to work at the same local bank as my husband, but I left 3 years ago to focus on fertility treatment. We were unable to have children, so we sought medical attention and were told that the problem was on my side. After a year of treatment, I was told that it is impossible for me to get pregnant. My mother-in-law and husband changed shortly after that. Originally, we were both working and managing our own income and budgets. When I decided to leave my job, my husband took on the responsibility of covering our living expenses. He managed our savings, paid the bills for rent and insurance, and started giving me a monthly allowance. At first, we were able to live comfortably on $1,000 a month. However, when we stopped pursuing fertility treatments, my husband suggested we could save money. Since we don't have fertility treatments anymore, you can save money, were his first words after we made the decision to stop trying to conceive. Because of the financial burden of the treatment, I've been giving you more money for living expenses, but you don't need it anymore. You can go back to work if you want, he'd added. True to his word, he gradually reduced the amount he gave me, first $800, then $600, and eventually $500 a month. There was a time when I desperately tried to find work, but even then, my mother-in-law interfered. Working as a full-time employee is not good for a wife, she asserted. If you don't share the housework, she will divorce you. So you're saying I shouldn't work? I questioned. Of course, if it's only part-time, then fine. You need to devote yourself to Carl and serve me. You can't even have grandchildren, so it's the least you can do, she replied. Despite enduring painful treatments, I couldn't conceive. My mother-in-law's attitude towards me changed drastically. She'd call me frequently, asking me to run errands, and I worked every weekend at their house. No matter what I did, she found fault and complained incessantly. "Why are you folding laundry like that? Why not put the corners together and fold it correctly and neatly? Do it again," she'd scold, even throwing the laundry onto the floor once. It seemed like she relished in hurting me. One evening after dinner, my father-in-law noticed my distress and offered to take me out for a drink. "I'm going out for a drink. Do you want to join me?" he asked, showing concern for my well-being. His kindness touched me deeply, and I couldn't help but cry. "I saw that, and if you want, you can vent to me," he reassured. He took me to a local bar where we sat across from each other, sharing a beer and a whiskey soda. As we ordered mixed nuts and a salad, his compassionate presence was a welcome relief from the turmoil at home. "I could tell Elizabeth and Carl were being rude to you," my father-in-law began, taking a sip of beer. He listened attentively as I poured out my grievances about how his wife and son had treated me since I stopped fertility treatments. "I'm blamed for not being able to have children and am forced to run errands," I confided. "My husband wouldn't let me work full-time, and he's reduced my living expenses since we stopped the treatments. Now, he only gives me $500 a month. What I hate most is being called a slave," I continued. "Elizabeth is not happy unless she gets her way. She wasn't like this before, but she became selfish after having Carl. She would yell at me so much that I began to dislike her, and now we pretend to be a happy couple. Do you think it's because he doesn't want to be with me?" "I'm jealous my father-in-law has a place to escape to," I admitted. "You're not tough enough to make yourself heard," he observed. "Yeah, but venting to you makes me feel better," I admitted gratefully. "Good, that makes me happy," he said before we had one more beer and one more whiskey soda before leaving the restaurant. However, as soon as we arrived back home, the situation escalated. "I'm back," I announced as I opened the door, only to find my mother-in-law and husband standing there. "Dad, did you have a night out with my wife?" my husband questioned, eyeing both of us. "What? I just invited Ruby for a drink," my father-in-law clarified. "What kind of relationship is this that you can go out for drinks together?" my mother-in-law interjected angrily. "Just like your husband said," I retorted, feeling the tension mounting. "What are you thinking, Ruby? Isn't it wrong for a wife to go to a bar with a man? You can't give me grandchildren, but you still have desires," my husband accused, joining in the finger-pointing. "Enough," a powerful voice echoed as if thunder had struck. My father-in-law was enraged, staring down Carl and Elizabeth. "What is it with you? All I wanted was for Ruby to relax," he thundered, his anger palpable. The rage sped up my heart rate. I thought, noting the intensity of the moment, mild men or people can become more difficult to deal with when injured. I mused, watching Elizabeth shudder at her name being called. Was she scared of him, or did she have something to hide? "You said what kind of relationship do you have with your father-in-law that you go out drinking together?" my husband challenged. "That's my daughter-in-law is treated like a slave, and I took her to get her mind off it. That's what happened because of Ruby," my father-in-law clarified, cutting through the tension with his explanation. "I can't have grandchildren," my mother-in-law's accusation hung in the air, a barb aimed directly at me. The words ignited a desire to yell, to defend myself against her constant blame for not providing her with grandkids. "How can you say that when you hate children?" I wanted to retort, but I bit my tongue. Yet even in my silence, I couldn't shake the urge to challenge her unfair judgment. "Well, grandchildren are different than other children, aren't they?" I finally spoke up, my voice edged with frustration. "That said, I don't think you wanted grandchildren enough to treat Ruby like this. You're just making an excuse to point the finger at her." My mother-in-law seemed about to respond, but then she abruptly averted her gaze. Was she tongue-tied or perhaps fearful of her husband's reaction? "Carl, wait," my attention shifted to my husband. "I heard you only give Ruby $500 a month for living expenses. Do you keep the rest of your salary?" I probed, unable to ignore the discrepancy. "No, I pay rent and insurance," he countered, but his evasive response left room for doubt. As the silence stretched, he seemed unable to conjure a convincing explanation. "I came here to discuss our future. Let's get right to it," my father-in-law intervened, leading us to the living room. "What do you mean discuss our future? Just sit down," my mother-in-law commanded, her tone imperious. "Make some coffee first, Ruby," she ordered, her words laced with condescension, but my father-in-law's sharp rebuke cut through the air. "Don't tell her what to do." I complied silently, sensing the tension crackling around me. As the coffee brewed, my father-in-law resumed speaking, his tone authoritative. "I'll be retired in a few years after my current assignment ends. I won't be living with you anymore." The revelation left my husband and mother-in-law stunned. "What do you mean?" They both protested in unison. "We've been masquerading as a couple for years, so we no longer need to live together," my father-in-law explained calmly. "I'll live where I want, and you can stay here." But my mother-in-law's panic was palpable. "That's fine, but I changed my mind after you accused me of being unfaithful earlier," she protested, rising from her seat. "I'm selling the house, Elizabeth. I'll leave you nowhere to live." Her announcement sent shockwaves through the room. "Why don't you just get a place to live?" my father-in-law suggested, but her response was desperate. "How am I going to do that? I can pay the rent." "Get Carl to help you," my father-in-law suggested, unaware of the financial strain. "He only gives her $500 a month. I'm sure he can pay for you." But my husband's nervousness betrayed him as he struggled to respond. "That's not possible," he stammered, his discomfort evident. "We don't have any money. If I do that, I won't be able to pay Mom's debt." The revelation hung in the air, casting a shadow over the room. "You just mentioned debt, didn't you?" My father-in-law's tone turned grave. "Explain." "I didn't mean what I said. I said explain." My father-in-law's voice thundered through the room, his anger palpable. My mother-in-law dissolved into tears at the sound of his fury, but his rage remained unabated. "Mom owes me $50,000. I'm her co-signer," my husband confessed, his expression resigned. "Around the time we stopped fertility treatment, Mom made an investment. She made some money at first, but then the stock market crashed," he admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "You mean you lost money in the stock market and went into debt?" I interjected, incredulous at the revelation. "I used family funds. At the time, we were betting on stocks that were supposed to go up, but eventually we ended up in debt. Now, I'm paying it with my salary, and Mom's repaying it by working part-time at a supermarket," my husband explained, his tone heavy with the weight of their financial burden. The news caught me off guard. I had never heard anything about stocks or debt. My mother-in-law had lost a significant amount of money in the stock market and had borrowed to compensate for it when I stopped fertility treatment. She must have tried to repay the debt by investing in stocks that were expected to rise. But as they struggled with repayment, those stocks failed to yield returns. Maybe. I couldn't help but voice my thoughts. "That's also when you and Carl began treating me like a slave." "Ruby, what are you trying to say? Were you just taking it out on me?" my mother-in-law challenged, her voice strained. "The slave treatment started around the time I stopped fertility treatments. I doubt it's because she wanted a grandchild so badly. But the simple answer is that she was taking it out on me because that was satisfying," I countered, the bitterness evident in my tone. As expected, my mother-in-law remained silent, her guilt hanging heavy in the air. "And Carl used the money that he took out of my monthly expenses to pay off his debts. He could save money because there's no fertility treatment. He didn't give me less money for some strange, unknown reason. He just needed the money to repay his mom's debt," I concluded, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "You stupid idiot." Finally, my father-in-law erupted, his frustration boiling over. "Even if it's family money, it's money I worked for and saved for you, only for you to invest it in stocks without consulting me. To top it all off, you lost it all. What the hell kind of money are you spending?" My father-in-law exploded, his frustration boiling over. With those words, he abruptly left the room, as if struck by a sudden realization. We all followed him, wondering what he was up to. "What are you doing?" my husband questioned as we trailed behind him. "Show me Elizabeth's stuff. I'll check what she's buying," my father-in-law demanded, his tone sharp. "Stop," Elizabeth cried, her voice tinged with panic, but her husband paid her no heed. He swung open the closet door, revealing a trove of luxury handbags. "Rudy, are these bags expensive?" "They're all luxury items costing over $1,000, my father-in-law remarked, his tone incredulous. As he opened a small drawer in the corner of the closet, an array of accessories greeted our eyes: rings, necklaces, and earrings, some adorned with diamonds, rubies, and other precious stones. Picking up a ring, I noticed the engraving indicating it was made of 18-karat gold. "Elizabeth, you bought all these expensive things without telling me?" My father-in-law's disappointment was palpable. "I'm sorry, but," Elizabeth began, but her husband cut her off with a look of disgust. "All this spending, investing in stocks without my permission, and treating Ruby like a slave. Divorce. I want a divorce, and I won't take no for an answer," he declared, his voice resolute. "But how am I supposed to live?" Elizabeth protested, her voice trembling. "Talk to Carl. I'll sell this house and land immediately. You can sell these bags and jewelry to pay for the move," my father-in-law retorted, leaving Elizabeth speechless. My husband, no longer wearing his arrogant demeanor, nodded silently, his gaze averted. The next day, my father-in-law presented 2 sets of divorce papers. "Here, Ruby. If you want to file for divorce too," he offered, handing one to me. I glanced at my husband, who sighed and turned away. Of course, I wanted a divorce, but more importantly, we wanted alimony from these people. That night, as I lay awake, I pondered the events of the past years. How long had I suffered in silence? What did I want now? I had once yearned for a child, enduring agonizing fertility treatments, only to realize I couldn't conceive. I continued my story, holding back the tears welling in my eyes. All the painful tests and treatments I endured in hopes of becoming a mother seemed futile now. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't have a baby. As I grieved, Carl informed me that since I no longer needed fertility treatment, he would reduce my living expenses. "What are you saying? This is all Carl's fault," Elizabeth interjected, her voice sharp. My father-in-law's horror was palpable, and my mother-in-law fell silent, her accusations hanging in the air. She had blamed me for not giving her a grandchild and then treated me like a slave. "Do you know how hard it was for me?" I demanded, my frustration boiling over. Naturally, there was no response from Elizabeth or Carl. In the end, Carl's actions were driven by his need to pay off debts, while Elizabeth sought an outlet for the stress of financial losses in the stock market. "I want you to reimburse me for this," I declared, my voice firm. "What if I say I won't pay?" Carl retorted defiantly. "Sure, I'll talk to my lawyer," I shot back, my resolve unwavering. After the new year, my father-in-law officially divorced my mother-in-law. Within days of putting his house on the market, he found a buyer who intended to tear down the old house and clear the land to build a new one. Left with nowhere to stay, my mother-in-law moved into a rundown apartment, barely holding together. She now resides with my ex-husband, struggling to make ends meet while paying off their debts and alimony to me, a financial burden I'm sure weighs heavily on them. Meanwhile, I found solace in a beautiful little apartment and secured a clerical job at a security company, thanks to my father-in-law's support. He encouraged me to utilize my accounting knowledge and skills from working at a bank. "I want you to be happy. If you ever need help, just tell me anything," he reassured me, his unwavering support a beacon of hope. With my father-in-law by my side, I embarked on this new chapter, determined to shine on my own. As I dressed for my first day of work, I made a promise to myself to embrace this fresh start and forge my path to happiness.